I'm Bob. I'm an alcoholic. One of the steps that was the most confusing for me was step 4. And I remember when I did my first one and I ended up doing the life story, I did it out of frustration because I turned to the book and I'm looking at the 3 columns on page 65, and I just don't get it. I don't know who Mr. Brown is, Mrs. Jones. I have no idea what they want me to do, and so I just wrote my life story. And you know something? Nothing changed, really. I didn't get any better. I didn't get connected to God. I didn't get more connected to you. All I did was dump a few secrets that I'd never shared with someone else about the couple things I was ashamed of. But nothing really changed. And so when I did out of the book, I started the resentment section, and it asks you to do 6 things. 4 of them require writing. 1 of them is a prayer, and probably the most vital one is an inside job realization that you have to get something you never got before. And on page 64, it starts the process. And it says, resentment is the #1 offender, destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From its stem all forms of spiritual disease, for we have not only been mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. And I love this promise. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. You know, I've had several diagnoses from pretty competent psychiatrists, and I've been treated for different diagnoses, and without much success, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and I started to treat my spiritual condition through these actions. And I am no longer the clinically depressed person. I'm no longer the neurotic with panic disorder and free-floating anxiety. I'm not that guy anymore. Contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. I could be that guy again. But I'm not that guy today. And I haven't been that guy for many, many years. And I am so, what an amazing thing. I was treating the mental condition. I was treating the physical stuff, the physical outside stuff. I was doing all the wrong things, and nothing ever got better until I started doing this. So what's the first thing we do? It says, in dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. So I'm going to make a list. If you look at page 65, the 3 columns, the first thing you do is column on the left. It says, I'm resentful at. So it's kind of who. And the book says that it's people, institutions, or principles. Most part, in my experience, about 99% of it, if not all of it, is people. A couple institutions show up there occasionally. In the U.S., IRS is a big one. Shows up. That is on a lot of resentment lists. But for the most part, it's people. So if I tell my guys to take one of those spring binders that opens, so you have 2 whole pages, you open it so you have 2 pages, and on the left-hand side, you put a name, drop down about 4 lines, put another name. When you get to the bottom of that page, you turn over and you start on the left-hand side again with 2 open pages, name, 4 lines, name, 4 lines, name, and you do that till you run out of gas. And when you can't think of anybody else to put down, you come to the second thing. Now, with a lot of, I only have experience for the most part with men, sponsoring men, but I know that there's a lot of resistance to this. And I think it's for a couple reasons. One is that the ego is smart and it read ahead. It knows that the 8th and 9th step is coming. So it wants to kind of minimize stuff a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Right. Well, the ego's smarter than I am, I think. And a lot of guys don't want to admit that they have resentments. Because in the admission that they resent someone is an admission that they were capable of being hurt. And we all fancy ourselves in the John Wayne tradition of being bulletproof and etc. So a lot of guys don't want to admit that. And so I have to come at it from the side. they're delusional. They don't think they have resentments when actually they have a lot. So I might ask a guy who tells me he doesn't have any resentments. You don't have any resentments? Well, I'll tell you what. Let's make a list of the stupid people. No, that's all right. Might take a few days, but okay. Let's make a list of the people that you feel smugly superior to. Let's make a list of the people that really owe you and the universe an amends. Let's make a list of the people that are wrong. And what are we doing really is that we're listing the people, places, and things, but mostly people that we have judgments against, that we've got cases built against. That's what a resentment is. It comes from the Latin resentire, meaning to resensitize, to refeel. It's more than anger. It's anger that we've harbored because we made a judgment about these people. And one of the reasons I think that resentment's the number one offender is that nothing will take your own perception and consciousness more hostage than a resentment. Did you ever notice that from the moment you get a resentment towards someone, from that moment on, that person can't do anything right? Did you ever notice that? It's weird. You just start watching them to build more of the case. You'll only notice what they do wrong. You'll never notice what they do right again from the minute, because the ego demands justification. My ego just wants to be right. It doesn't matter if I'm sleepless. It doesn't matter if I'm uptight. It doesn't matter if I'm conflicted. It's hell-bent on being right. And so from the moment it takes my perception hostage, and you can't be wrong, but they are. I can't be. It won't let you be wrong, but it makes them wrong. So I list all these people down there, and then after I'm done, I come back and go to the top, and the first one next to it in column number 2, I'll put a couple bullet points. Now, the examples in the book are very brief bullet points, very short. It might have 3 different little bullet points next to a name. You know, I kind of felt that bullet points are hardly enough, really. I think these are essay answers right here in column number 2. I would like to describe it in such a way and really lay it out so that when I eventually, in the 5th step, read it to my sponsor, he'll go, "They did that to you? I'm getting the boys together, and we're going to go over there in the middle of the night, and we're going to make this right." That's the way I want to explain it, right? I want to sell you on my resentment. The book says, nah, just bullet points, just little brief, just the facts, not the explanation, not the justification, not the rationalization, just the facts. Wife left you, went with another man, lied to you, boss fired you. Just the facts. And then the third thing is I'm looking for the aspects of self. And the book uses 5 terms. I'm looking for the things in me that are me that were hurt, threatened, injured, interfered with, or affected. And if you want to see where those 5 words are, starts on the top of page 65 in the first sentence. Hurt or threatened, 4 lines down, injuries, 6 lines down, things that were interfered with, and then the top of the 3rd column affects my. So I'm looking for the things that were hurt, threatened, injured, interfered with, or affected. And it gives the examples. Pride, my pocketbook, my ambitions, my sex, my personal relations, my security, me. Now, when I'm done with the 3rd column, I'm supposed to pause and do something. I'm supposed to do something that involves a way of looking at this. And the book spends all of page 66 trying to sell me on something. I have to get that this stuff's killing me. There's 7 expressions on this page that could be interpreted as almost death threats. It says things like, we found that these resentments were infinitely grave, like in graveyard. And then it goes on to say, we found that they are fatal. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns. We drink again. Thus to drink is to die. These are poison. And it goes on and on and on just to get me to a point where it says, so we were prepared to look at these from an entirely different angle. Am I? Am I convinced of the futility of this enough? Am I surrendered enough that I would rather be free and happy than right? Because if you still need to be right about these people, you're never going to get free. You know, the problem with resentment, it's like putting someone in a jail cell and then condemning yourself to stand guard at the door for the rest of your life. The jailer is more hostage than the jailee. Because the jailee can just read, do all kinds of stuff, but the jailer's got to watch them all the time. So if you're prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. So, well, what would that look like? Okay, so would it be fair to say that in the first 3 columns, there's no new information there? I've had these cases on file for years about these people, and every time I notice something else wrong with them, I just add another page to the case file. It's like I'm taking the position of a prosecuting attorney. Column number 1, perpetrator. Column number 2, the heinous acts. Column number 3, the damage done. So I got a pretty good case built on all these people. Now the book says we're prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. So what's that look like? Well, maybe I get up off the prosecuting attorney's bench in the courtroom, and I walk across and I sit down on the defense table, and I start looking at it and pleading the case from the person's point of view that I resent. What did it look like to them? That really is looking at this from an entirely different angle. Selfish, self-serving, self-centered people never do this. We never stop to try to understand people we have judgments against because we're convinced we're right about them. And so we're prepared to look at these from an entirely different angle. And then it goes on to say, the wrongdoings of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. How could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. It's really true. Here's what I did, and it really made me sick in the rooms of AA, is that I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and my ego understood that resentments were bad. I mean, you don't have to go to many meetings before you start getting it. You're not supposed to have them. They're deadly. I mean, you get it. And wanting the bragging rights of a good member and wanting to look spiritual and like I'm in recovery, my ego made the decision that resentments are bad and we're just not going to have them anymore. That's not how you get free, that's how you build an ulcer. And so I would go to meetings and I would smile and love everybody. Go home and plot your death. Sink into a deep depression or the like. The book refers to that in chapter 6 as living the double life. We have a stage character that we want our fellows in AA to see, and secretly we know we're not that guy. See, you can fool a lot of people a lot of the time, but you can't fool yourself. And that's the problem, isn't it? We always know somewhere. I always know I'm phony. I always know that I secretly judge and hate and resent a lot of people. I try to look spiritual, but I know secretly how much I worry. I always know me. I don't like it. And yet I can't stop it. I can't wish these away any more than alcohol. And so I pretend like they're gone. There's 4 unwritten laws in society that I think affect most of us, and we're not even cognizant that they're there. And yet they dominate a lot of us. Rule number 1, don't have anything wrong with you. Rule number 2, if you do have something wrong with you, get over it quickly. I want to see you at the meeting tomorrow night and you're over it. Rule number 3, if you do have something wrong with you and you can't get over it quickly, act like you did. And rule number 4, and boy do I get this one as a depressive, if you do have something wrong with you and you can't get over it quickly and you can't even pull off acting like you did, at least be properly ashamed of yourself. There's one do not in the book that's significant to me, and it's do not be discouraged. I've been discouraged a lot. Do you ever have the experience, those of you that are sober a long time, you're coming up on an AA birthday, and you sort of get a little, almost like just a little depressed kind of thinking. I think things like, oh God, I thought I'd be a lot less self-centered than this by now. I thought I would have come further by now. And you look, even the newcomers start looking better than you, and so if I'm prepared to look at this from an entirely different angle, and I'm willing, and I get that I can't wish them away any more than alcohol, then what do I do? And the next 4 words probably changed my life. It said, this was our course. And in fact, I think it's the only course it gives us. And here's what it asks me to do. In this, some people read over this and don't even get it. It says, it's asking me to make a realization. This is back to that innermost self stuff. This is that they want me to connect the dots inside me with stuff I've never connected the dots with. They want me to wake up to stuff and really realize things and make them real that I've never realized before. And this is not something that is placated intellectually. They're asking me to really get something here. And what? What am I supposed to get? Well, 2 things. First thing's easy. It says, we had to realize that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Yes, they are. And they're stupid too. The ego, you can feel the ego getting ready, could jump right on board. Yes, they're sick. I could get right behind that. They're sick. And where's Dr. Kevorkian now that we need him? I get it. They're sick. And once I've conceded that they're sick, then it hooks me. And it says, though I did not like their symptoms. What symptoms are they talking about? Column number 2. The bullet points. If they weren't spiritually sick, if they were right with themselves and right with God and would they have done what they did in column number 2? If I wasn't so spiritually sick, would I have done all the things that were on my 8-step list? No, I wouldn't have. I was driven by 100 forms of fear, self-pity, self-seeking. I was so full of myself that my spirit was sick, and I was driven by it. So even though I didn't like their symptoms, so everything in column 2 is the symptoms of a spiritual sickness. He slept with my wife. If he'd been spiritually well, would he have done that? I guess not. I didn't like their symptoms and the way they disturbed me. They disturbed me. Column number 3, pocketbook, ambitions, pride, self-esteem. So even though I don't like their symptoms, and you know what's the funny thing happens here for some of us? You realize I don't hate the person, I hate what they did in column number 2. There's certain Christian sects that say, love the sinner, hate the sin. Right? And the truth is, most of the people that were on my resentment list, if they hadn't done what they did in column number 2, they wouldn't have been on that list. A lot of those people I had actually loved at one time till I developed a judgment against them. So even though I didn't like their symptoms and the way these symptoms disturbed me, and then here's the deal. This is what changed my life. To start to realize how they were perhaps like me. Sick too. What's this like ourselves thing? Like me. What does that mean? That means that I have to get humble enough and honest enough with myself to come down off the throne of judgment, off the high horse, and come down into humanity enough honestly where I could understand that this person I built the case against is perhaps me. Maybe it's me with a worse childhood. Maybe it's me when I've been really hurt. Maybe it's me when I'm really afraid. But can I get honest enough with myself to see the truth? The truth is, if I had everything going on inside of me, tweaking me, that's inside of them, tweaking them, that I could have easily done to someone else what they did to me. That the illusion of smug superiority is but that, an illusion. That I could have, that's me. It might be me on a really bad day, but it's me. It might be me with a more abusive childhood. Because hurt people will hurt people. It's maybe me driven by more fear than I'm used to. But can I get it? Can I really get it that's me suffering so much I did that? How much would I have to suffer to take those actions? How vacant would I have to be that selfish, that greedy, that lustful? How empty and inadequate would I have to feel to be driven to those ridiculous lengths of and futile attempts at validation? What I just discovered is most of the things that I resented other people for, I had done to others in one form or another. Another thing I started to realize as I put myself in the position of the people I resent is that if I had everything going on in me that was going on in them, I suspect I might have been worse. I might have been worse. I was taking a guy through this years ago, and he had a terrible father. His dad was a chronic alcoholic, and he was also one of those very violent drunks, angry, violent rage guys. And this poor kid, when he was growing up, used to get beat up all the time by his dad, sometimes really badly, like where he'd have broken bones and contusions, and he'd have to go to the emergency room. And this was back at a time before they really looked for child abuse. And if you went in there with a broken arm and you told them a story about falling out of a tree or wrecking your bicycle, they didn't look close. They didn't, they just patched you up and sent you on your way. And so he had a whole childhood of this horror. And it affected him. He tried to get free of it. He'd spent on and off for about 8 years in therapy. He beat pillows. He did a lot of stuff. He did the Gestalt chair, all that stuff, trying to get free of it. Couldn't get free of it. And here we are, dealing with his number one resentment, and he buried it in the middle. And he's talking about it, and it's a tough one. It's a tough one. His dad had ruined him, his childhood. He stole his childhood from him. He never had any close friends as a kid because he couldn't bring them home. He was afraid that they'd see the monster that was at home. He had to live a double life. Even he was forced as a little kid to live a double life. He had to create stories about his home life that were all fantasies because he didn't want anybody to know. He didn't want anybody to know. And he couldn't get free of it. And here we are in the 5th step, and he's talking about all this. And I grabbed a copy of the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, and I opened it to a little paragraph in step 10 where Bill extrapolates on the principle of this was our course in the other-centeredness and the understanding. And Bill says in there something like, as we learn true tolerance and see what real love actually means, it becomes more and more apparent to us that all people, including ourselves, are frequently wrong as well as emotionally ill. And as we grow, we start to realize that we're all just suffering from the pains of growing up. And I read that to him. He didn't seem to get it much. And I went back to the book and I paraphrased the part on This Was Our Course. And I said to him, you have to realize how you were perhaps like your dad, spiritually sick. And when he heard me imply that he was like his dad, he got very angry and very defensive and on the muscle. And he started ranting and raving and cussing and yelling and carrying on. All this venom's coming out of him and just went on this rant. It's very hard to be around somebody that goes like that. All this hostility's coming out of him. And I'm just sitting there, and I don't know what to do with this situation. I'm not equipped for this. I don't know how to handle it. All I can think of is, well, he's evidently not prepared to look at this from an entirely different angle. I don't know what to say to the guy. And he finishes his rant, and I said to him, just go on. And he started reading another resentment, and something started eating at me. And I think that, God works funny somehow. I ask God when I listen to a 5th step, I get quiet. I ask the guy to ask God into the deal he's about to do. I ask God to help me to be useful. And what I think happened next was not of me, but through me. And I think it might have been as a result of asking God to use me. I don't know. And I stopped him and I said, I want to talk about one of the other resentments. And at first he thought it was his dad. And I said, no, not your, back at the beginning. There was a woman that you lived with and you were involved with for a lot of years, and you lived together, and she eventually threw you out, right? And you had a resentment because yeah. I said, there were kids there, weren't there? Yeah. I said, listen, I'm just wondering if in all those years, as those kids were growing up and you were living in that household, was there ever a time when you were drunk or stoned on drugs or you were hungover, was there ever a time that you ever did anything to hurt those kids? And I'll tell you something, it looked like the blood ran out of his face. And he hung his head down, and he didn't say anything, and I don't know what's going on with this guy. And he lifts his head up, and he actually had a tear come in one side of his face, and he said to me in this horrid voice, it was so pained he could hardly speak, he said, I'm just like my goddamn father. I'm just sitting there. I don't know what to say to him. I finally said, well, how did you feel about yourself when you hurt those kids? He said, I couldn't stay drunk enough. I said, do you think your dad might be like that? And he said, I don't know. He said, I haven't seen my dad in years. Only my sister is the only one that has in contact with him. And his sister had told him that his dad had such a bad liver and pancreas that his dad had been forced into a state of abstinence against his will because his body would not metabolize alcohol. And his sister had told him that his dad was the most lonely, depressed, negative person she'd ever been. It was hard for her to be around him, but she'd go and see him regularly. And he started to see himself in his father. At one point he said to me, maybe my father is a vision of my life without AA, of my future. And he started to the veil started to lift, and he started to look at his dad from an entirely different angle. He started to to see himself in his father. See, he felt very ashamed when he'd hurt those kids. He never suspected that his dad felt shame and remorse over it because of the defense mechanisms. One of the things that always aggravates me, if you hurt me, if I'm okay with it, if you act properly ashamed of yourself. What makes me crazy is if you have if your defense mechanisms reflect to me as if you didn't even bother you. That makes me crazy. And so the people I resent, I suspect that they didn't even bother them. But every person I ever hurt, every person I've ever hurt in my life, I paid a price inside for. Because, you end up feeling about yourself the same way for doing that to them, the same way you'd feel about someone who did it to you. It's inescapable. You may push it under the rug, you may sweep it under, you may stuff it down there, but there is no free lunch. Nobody gets away with anything. And he started to realize what was driving his dad, because it was the same thing that had been driving him. The frustration and the drunkenness and the sickness and the self-loathing. We're funny people. Did you ever notice on moments where you really hate yourself, you'll attack someone, right? Verbally, right? I think I'm the kind of person that the cat scratches me and the next day I kick the dog, right? How many of us go to work and are frustrated at work, and we come home and we vent it all on the person that loves us the most? And they didn't deserve it. And they didn't deserve it. And the next thing that the book asks us to do is say this prayer. And it's a call for action. It says we ask God to help us show them, which shows a verb, demonstrate towards them, express to them, act towards them, to show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we'd cheerfully grant a sick friend. Well, if you have really done the work, and this was our course, this is legitimate and it's easy. If you are trying to placate it intellectually, this prayer doesn't have much to it. But if you've really done the work and you really understand that this person that you've judged, that they're driven by a lot of fear and sickness, they suffer for being the way they are. One of the old adages I just love is that we're not punished for our sins, we're punished by them. And one of the things that started happening with my friend is he started to really get that him and his dad were much alike. He had never wanted to believe that. But it was like the veil was lifting, and he was starting to see. And we had a conversation at one point about his dad's childhood. His dad had been abused as a kid. And he started to realize how much his dad had suffered and was driven by that pain. And what happens to some of us here as we say this prayer and our consciousness shifts and we start acting towards them the way that we would cheerfully act towards a sick friend, with the same kind of tolerance, the same kind of compassion, the same kind of pity, the same kind of patience. One of the great examples of this was in the movie Bucket List. And if you ever saw that movie, there was a great scene in there that exemplified, this was our course, this consciousness. Both Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson have been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And they're both put on a regimen of brutal chemotherapy. And I've been around people, I've sat with people that have been through this. It is horrid. And their treatments are staggered, which means that on one day, the one guy is at the sickest he gets from the chemotherapy. The other guy's had it a few days before, and he's over the worst of it. And there's a scene in there where the one guy is in the grip of the worst effects of the chemotherapy. And he's irritable, and he's sick, and he's throwing up, and he's cussing and throwing things around. And his roommate's not looking at him like he's a jerk. His roommate's looking at him with compassion and love because he gets it. He sees past the symptoms of the chemotherapy and knows what the guy's really experiencing because he had been experiencing it a couple days before. I think this is just a matter of waking up and seeing past the defense mechanisms, past the selfishness, past the fear that drove those people and drove me to see the me that is in them. And some of us at this point start developing compassion, something that self-centered people never have. We placate it because we want the bragging rights of somebody with empathy and compassion. But the truth is, most alcoholics don't have compassion. We're too wrapped up in ourselves. Compassion comes from two Latin words, cum meaning with, and passio meaning pain. In other words, I'm able now to sit with their pain. I get you. I really see you. I see you. I'm sorry. I never got it before. You can't help being the way you are, can you? Just as I couldn't help being the way I was when I was at my worst, and when I was the way I was when I was the way I was, you can't help being the way you are either, can you? And you start to understand, and you start to see yourself in these people. And I think forgiveness often comes through understanding. And later on in the book, it talks about expanding this. It says our real purpose is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And what my friend did is he started to wake up to this. And then in the last part, in the sixth thing we do after the last thing after the prayer, in the middle of page 67, it starts off by saying, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done. Wilson comes back several lines later, and he says the same thing again in different words. And from my studying of Wilson, if he says something twice in the same paragraph in different words, he's pretty serious about this positioning. And he says it later. It says, we disregard the other person involved entirely. Well, what does that mean? That means that I can't do something I've developed to an art form, and that is to stare at your mistakes and your wrongs and put mine in the shade by looking at yours. What if I can't do that? What if I have to look at what kind of a son I was and couldn't look at the mistakes my father and mother made? What if they were the perfect parents and all I had to do was look dead on at how I was a son and look to see where I'd been selfish, where I'd been dishonest. I can't use them. I can't use their mistakes. Where I'd been selfish, where I'd been dishonest, where I'd been self-seeking, where I'd been frightened. I think for some of us, if we can do this, it's the first time in our lives we ever stood up as an adult and took the responsibility that we used to hide in the shadow of what we could find wrong with others. And I'll tell you something. You do it this way, you get a longer 8-step list, unfortunately. My first couple 8-step lists, there was a lot of people that weren't on there because they had done something wrong and I exonerated myself by their mistakes. And now I can't do that anymore. And what my friend discovered is that he'd been a terrible son. He had used his father's drunkenness and violence to justify horrendous selfish behavior. He intuitively knew his dad felt guilty and remorse for all of that. And so he played on that and borrowed thousands and thousands of dollars from his dad and never paid a dime back because his dad was an asshole. He gossiped about his father. He turned everybody in the family except for the one sister against his dad. And he would puff himself up in smug superiority as he would bad rap his father to anyone who would listen. And the veil had lifted, and he saw what a sick man his dad was, and he saw himself in his dad, and he knew that his dad couldn't help being the way he was. And he realized, oh my God, what have I done? Why would I do this to this sick man who can't help it? And so he went to make amends to his father, and I remember he called me up, and he was very uncomfortable, and I said, call me when you're done. And he went to this little trailer. His dad lived in this little shabby trailer in the high desert in California. When he was done, he called me back, and I said, what happened? And he said, man, I was scared. I went to that trailer and knocked on the door. I felt like some monster was going to answer the door. And instead, this little old man, this little old depressed man with his hands shook, and he looked so insecure and so afraid, answered the door. A lonely old man. And he said at one point he looked in his dad's eyes, and he said he thought he saw himself. And he went in and he started to clean up his side of the street without ever mentioning anything his dad had ever done. He told his dad about how sorry he was for being a bad son, and when he got sick, he never came to help. He never visited him. He borrowed all that money and never paid a dime back of it. He admitted his own selfishness, his own dishonesty with his father. And the dam broke. And his father started telling him how sorry he was that he was that way when he was a kid. And his dad broke down and he couldn't help it. See, his father needed to make amends to the son as much, maybe more than the son needed to make amends to the father. But the father never had and never would have the tools. Sandy, my friend Sandy used to say, the person with the most tools gets to do the most work. If you have someone that you know that really owes you an amends, and you're not going to make your amends until they make theirs, you may never get right. The person with the tools. I've made amends to people that I didn't even do anything, but there's separation, and I have the tools. So I go to them because amends is the ego. Here's how the ego wants to defeat you. It starts talking about right and wrong. That's the realm of the ego. The realm of the ego is judgment, right and wrong. The spirit doesn't care about right and wrong. It just yearns for love and connectivity and unity. It's not about right and wrong. It's about mending the separation between you and that person. I've gone to people that I don't even know what's wrong. But I know that because I start thinking, man, they're acting like I've stepped on their toes. They're acting like I might have done something to hurt their feelings. Now maybe I didn't and they're imagining it, or maybe I did and don't know it because I am capable of that. I'm capable of shunning someone and they feel like I've rejected them or dissed them, and in actuality I just got something on my mind. And yet they got hurt just the same. Did I want to hurt them? No. Would I be, if I did, am I sorry that they got hurt? Yeah, I don't want them to be hurt. I didn't intend to hurt them. And I've gone to people like that and say, look, I'm often a knucklehead. I'm very self-centered, and sometimes I do things that hurt people's feelings, and I don't know that I've done them, but I suspect here, because of and I could be wrong, and I have this suspicion I might have done something to hurt your feelings. And I want you to know I love you, and if I have, I didn't intend to, and I want to take the responsibility for it, and I want to make it right. And sometimes people start backpedaling. I've had 3 responses to that kind of approach. One is they backpedal, and no, because they're embarrassed, because maybe the harm in them is an illusionary harm, and when confronted with them, they're embarrassed. I had one guy who did that too. He came back later to me, a year or so later, and he said, I really did have a resentment towards you. I said, I thought so, but when I asked you, he said, yeah. I said, well, did I do something? He said, no. He said, when you bought that supercharged Jaguar, I just hated you from that moment. And I said, oh, I get that. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I understand. And we cleared up the separation. And then I've had other people I go to, and they, oh my God, they say something I'm not expecting. Do you ever have someone, it feels like they're attacking you. They're telling you what you did wrong. And not to do that and not defend yourself. Just to do that and listen and think, did I do that? Is that possible? And not respond. Not respond, just say, okay. Well, if I'm sorry. I didn't want you to be hurt. I really am sorry. And then think about it later and start to see one of two things. Either they imagined I did that when I didn't do it, or my actions exhibited someone that was doing that and I didn't even get it. I didn't even get it. I've had people feel like I didn't like them, and they resent, because we're the kind of people. If I think you don't like me, I'm going to not like you first, right? And I've had people not like me because I'm self-centered, and self-centered people often are preoccupied in their head with something. And you walk by me and I don't acknowledge you and say hi, and you think that I'm pissed at you. So you're pissed at me now, right? And I wasn't. And I tell you, I like to clear that up. I want to be free. My goal in life is to exist in a place where there's no place on the planet I can't go where I have to have a conversation in my head with anyone. I think that's real freedom. I'll tell you a quick story and we'll break for lunch. If I hadn't have done this at a little over 4 years sober, and then for the next 6 years take guys through this, in my 11th year of sobriety, I would have probably drank or possibly committed homicide. Matter of fact, I was close. I'd actually at one point hired a hitman. I wouldn't have survived my 11th year of sobriety. And I'll tell you what happened in my 11th year. I was married to a gal I met in AA, and we'd been together for 6 years. We were married for 4.5 years, and we had a daughter that was about 2 years old. That unbelievable. I can't even put into words the experience I had with my daughter. I was in the delivery room. I was the first person to ever hold her after she was born out. I came out of her mom. She cried her first tears in my arms. It was unbelievable experience. Something happened to me that day. Stole my heart. Unbelievable. And when my daughter's almost 2 years old and we're together all those years, my wife comes to me and wants a divorce. And I'll tell you, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I am so self-centered and so wrapped up in my little plans and designs, I didn't even know there was a problem. You'd think, how could you not know there's a problem? If you're asleep in your own life and not paying attention to anything except you cannot get what's going on with other people. If they're not waving flags in your face, you don't get it. And I didn't get it. I didn't get it. Well, I got it now. She wants a divorce. Okay, there's a problem. So I talked her out of the divorce. I said, let's go to some marriage counseling. So I got hooked up with marriage counselor. We started going to the marriage counselor. I'm trying to save this marriage. I didn't even know there's a problem. We go to marriage counseling, and we're talking about stuff. And my first sponsor, had retired and bought a bus, one of those recreational buses, and he was gone. He didn't have a cell phone, so he had to stop at a payphone and call me. And he called me. I might go 2 weeks or more, 3 weeks without talking to him. And so I'm going through marriage counseling and the possibility of a divorce and some marriage problems. So I had to have somebody to talk to. So I have a sponsee who was not only my sponsee, he was one of my favorite guys. We were also very good friends. He was a guy like this guy. So I used him as my confidant with all these problems. And, well, one day my wife comes to me and she says, I don't want to do the marriage counseling anymore. I'm done. I want out of this marriage. And I tried to surrender. I tried to take a stance, okay, and, we'll just do this. And I live in Las Vegas. An uncontested divorce in Las Vegas is quick. People come there to get divorced. It's quick. Matter of fact, so fast, you can be single a month and you haven't even got the visa bill for the divorce yet. I mean, that's how quick it is, right? And we got divorced legally. The papers, the court thing was on a Thursday afternoon. The next morning, Friday morning, I discover that my ex-wife of 12 hours, and my daughter had moved in with my sponsee, my confidant, of my best friend. And then I discovered they'd been sleeping together the whole last year of my marriage, and now I understand what's happened here. And I'm insane. I'm nuts. At one point I was sponsoring a guy, his family owned some casinos, and he's sort of mob connected. He'd set me up with a hitman. Thank God I didn't. That's a whole story how God intervened on that one. Whoa. No, true story. I don't even have time for that. But I am insane. And I know from helping guys that the freedom, the only place I'm going to find it is in this process on page 64 through 67. But I can't do it. I know I should do it. I just can't. I can't. When I start approaching concepts like this was our course, it's like, I can't do it. But one of the things that saved my life is I've always been very involved in service and 12-step calls, a lot of H&I meetings, and I upped my meetings to probably 15 to 20 a week. I was doing 5 or 6 hospital detox meetings a week, and I'm sponsoring a ton of guys. And and God has a funny sense of humor. All of a sudden, I'm sponsoring a whole bunch of guys that are either going through a divorce or relationship breakups, all at the same time. So I just pile a bunch of them in my car, and we just go from meeting to meeting, and we're like the depressed section in the meeting, you know what I mean? I swear to God, I was down at the SOS Club, and I heard the secretary say to the person chairing the meeting, whisper, "Don't call on those guys." You know, right? And I'm nuts. But those guys bought me little islands and windows in my life where I'd be wrapped up in their pain and I'd be temporarily free from mine. And they saved me until I could eventually come back and do what it says in the book. And I put both their names down on the left-hand column. Next to their names, I put the bullet points of the lies and the infidelity and the cheating and everything. What was hurt, threatened, affected, injured, and interfered with? Everything. Pride, oh my God, pride was devastated. Sex life, personal relations. It just about destroyed my home group. It split it in half because people took sides. There was the people that took their side because they always take the side of the underdog. There was people that took my side as the victim. And oh God, it was just it was terrible. It affected every area of my life. And then the question, am I prepared? Do I want to be free of this? Am I prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle? Am I willing to stand in their shoes and imagine their experience in this situation? And I'll tell you something, when I put myself in the place of my ex-wife, I did not like what I saw. I saw a woman who came from an alcoholic home. She met a guy in AA, fell in love, wanted to spend the rest of her life with this guy. She put all her eggs in the basket of this marriage. A woman that doesn't have a job or a business. A woman that doesn't have sponsees. A woman that doesn't have commitments. All her eggs are in the basket of this relationship. And in no time at all, she finds herself married to a guy that's working 80, 90 hours a week because he has an opportunity to build this great business. A guy who's so involved in AA and all these commitments that she found herself in a very desolate place, married to a guy that just wasn't there very much. And when he did come home, it would usually be like 12:30 at night after he closed the store up, and he'd just come home and pass out pretty much and get up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning and do it all over again. And when I really put myself in her place, I started to wake up to the loneliness and desolation she must have felt in that marriage. And I knew, because of the way she was raised, she was absolutely incapable of discussing it with me. She could not face confrontation. And I started to get an idea of her suffering. And I'll tell you, there was one point in that process where I remember saying to myself, my God, how did she last as long as she did? And I could all of a sudden see myself with that kind of desolation and frustration and resentment, because she started resenting me. Because I was happy. All my vacancies are filled with work in AA. My life's wonderful. I'd go off into the world that's my world every day, and she'd be there all alone with a baby that was very colicky and high maintenance. And I started to realize, and I don't know about you, but I'll tell you about me. You get me lonely enough, you get me resentful enough, you get me scared enough, and I am capable of a lot of things that I normally would never, ever, ever do if I wasn't sick inside. And I remember thinking, I've thought about this over the years, and I thought, do you know something? If the day of our wedding, if I would have hired the most proficient sociologists and psychologists from the greatest universities in the world, and I brought them into a room with her, and we did a whole bunch of psychometric tests on her and profiles, and then I said to these brilliant men in psychology and sociology, listen, you have got to give me a game plan that would make this decent, principled woman eventually do something she would never do, and that's to cheat on her husband. You got to give me a plan that I could initiate that would eventually make her cheat on me. They couldn't have come up with anything more effective than what I did over the next couple years. And the sad part is I don't even know I'm doing it. I can't see past my little plan, my job and my company and my AA and my me. I can't. It's the ultimate in selfish inconsideration. It's not that I ignore you. I just stare at me so much I don't see you. Right? And I started thinking, oh my God. And I went around deluding myself that I was such a great husband because I provided financially and I never cheated on her. When in actuality, what she really needed in that relationship, she got none of it from me. And I understood. Did the same thing with him. Put his name down. Walked it through the process. He was easy. He's a guy. I know. Jeez. Oh, I sponsor a lot of guys. One of the things I got to tell them all the time, You got to protect you from you. No, I know you're giving the new girl a ride home is noble in content. Don't do that. Well, why not? Nothing's going to happen. My heart's in the right place. Yeah, listen. She's going to put her hand on your crotch and your intentions are going to go out the window. Stop it. And I know what happened. I know exactly what happened. She opened the door. He caved. And he hadn't been with anybody in so long. I remember one time he said to me, it was kind of pathetic. He said, gee, Bob, if I could just have what you have with Karen someday. I didn't know he meant specifically. I know. I thought he meant kind of in a general way, you know. So when she opened that door, he did what 1,000 guys have done who got themselves in places they shouldn't have been. And he caved. And he caved. And he hated himself for it just as she hated herself for the infidelity. And I got it. And I got it. I went to them and I made amends. I remember when I made amends to her, I said to her, I want you to know how sorry I am that I was so self-centered and so wrapped up in what I was doing that I never understood how lonely and alone you must have been in that marriage. And I know that you're a very principled woman and you would never, under any ordinary circumstances, ever compromise that and cheat on your husband. And I'm sorry I was gone so much that I was a factor in driving you to do something that's against your character. And we had a long conversation. At one point, she just started to cry. And she started to cry because I think all she ever wanted me to do was get it, you know. She had beaten herself up a ton for that. We're very good friends today. She's not an alcoholic, even though I met her in AA. It's oddly enough, there's a lot of people in AA that aren't alcoholics. She's not an alcoholic. She can have a beer once in a while, she found out. And she doesn't like it. She's real involved in a church. She's a minister. She's a minister in a Christian church. And in my small way, I drove her to the Lord, I suppose. Well, my second wife went to prison after we got divorced, so there's balance in the universe, I'll tell you. True story. That's a true story. True story. And then he was so funny because when I came to make amends with him, he was a little skittish. Oh, my God. Because he kept thinking I was going to kill him or something. Oh, my God. He's like, what? He thought I was up to something. I wasn't up to something. Because once the resentment is put to rest, there's an automatic, if you really do the inside job, it's an automatic restoration of love. Right? I get it. I loved them before. Once the resentment's gone, why wouldn't I love them again? And I did. I loved them. I started sponsoring him again after a period of time. And it was at a time when they were married, and now their marriage is shaky. This is the honest God truth. This is the truth. I spent a lot of time and effort with him as my sponsee trying to help him save his marriage to my ex-wife. Honest to God. And I'll tell you, it was not for any noble reasons. I did it because he was just an amazing stepfather to my daughter. And I always thought, watching them objectively without the resentment, that they were a lot better together than her and I were. They fit together. Her and I didn't really. They fit together. And I tried, and it fell apart. And I'm still real good friends with him or with her, and I sponsor him. We were doing this kind of thing, only two of us in Arkansas at a big conference last year, and I'm sharing exactly what I'm sharing now. And he's sitting next to me, waiting to do his part, and they don't know that he's the guy I'm talking about, right? Honest to God. And he's getting ready because he knows what's coming. So he's like watching the crowd. And he's watching this one woman. And the more I talk about the infidelity and all that stuff, the angrier she gets. She's just sitting there thinking, I don't know who this person is, but I'd kill him. She's in that kind of place. And then I said, well, and I got free of it, and I sponsor that guy today, and by the way, here's the guy. And this woman is like looking at him shocked, and Craig's got a funny sense of humor. Craig goes, gotcha. And if you came to my home group, you would see us together, and I spent the most of Wednesday with him before I flew out to Canada. We did a hospital meeting together, and I sponsor him. He's like he's a fun guy. He's one of my favorite sponsees. Alcoholics Anonymous works. If you're willing to come down off your high horse and get humble enough to change your mind, you can get free. Let's break for lunch.